I think one key thing that nutritionists can bring to a production team, whether that's an internal team or a consulting nutritionist, is, as we all know, feed cost is the largest part of the cost from farrow to finish or wean to finish. So if that nutritionist can accurately predict the performance, then they can accurately predict that cost, and therefore can best help you manage your checkbook and what your balance sheet looks like.
Swine it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Greiner, your host for today's Swine It podcast. And with me today, I have Dr. Trey Kellner, who is a nutritionist at AMVC. Trey, how are you doing today?
Hey, doing well, Laura. Yourself?
I'm doing very well. We're glad to have you on the podcast today, Trey. I think before we get started, though, I'm going to have you do a brief introduction about yourself to our audience, just in case they're not familiar with you.
Sure. Well, thank you. My name is Trey Kellner, and I'm currently the managing partner and swine nutritionist for AMVC Nutritional Services based in Audubon, Iowa. Even though I'm based in Audubon, Iowa, I have the pleasure and the challenge of feeding about 175,000 sows and 2 million annual market pigs across 4 time zones in the U.S. now. So from Ohio to California and from North Dakota to Arizona, across about 40 different feed mills. So hopefully that current challenge that I have every day can provide some insight and value for this podcast and listeners.
Absolutely. I think we just need one more time zone and we'll cover most of the continental US there, Trey. That's impressive.
Maybe Hawaii one day, right?
Right. Right. What a horrible thing to have to go travel to Hawaii to see pigs, right?
Yeah.
For sure. Well, and I think that's really what we want to talk to you a little bit about today is not so much travel, but more about what does your day look like as a nutritionist and just kind of help people understand maybe a little bit more about what a nutritionist does, and particularly one that's involved in production in such a system as yourself with that type of number and feed mills and just kind of how you manage through that process. So I think maybe let's just start with that. What's your routine like on a daily basis?
Sure. So on a daily basis, it's really tough because no 2 days are the same. However, if we expand that just a little bit, I do try to organize at least my week to try to get everything accomplished and try to keep all the balls in the air without any of them dropping and shattering, right? So what I try to do is I try to set up meeting days, farm days, and then catch up / office / data mining days, right? So typically what I'll do is I will set up meeting days for Monday and Wednesday. So I will have meetings, whether that's grow finish production, sow team production, or account team meetings, feed desk organization meetings here for my direct employees, whatever that may be, production calls. We'll try to have those on Mondays and Wednesdays. And then Tuesday I typically have as a flex day, right? So figure out what fires are currently out there, whether on the slat level or at the boardroom level or somewhere in between, and then have that time to then answer those issues. Not that I don't do that on Monday and Wednesday, but it's more of a dedicated flex day to handle those things. Then Thursday, I try to be on farm at the slat level or in one of our feed mills. And then Friday, I typically have for kind of a catch-up day and then try to set the stage for the next week. Right. So I would say no 2 days will ever look the same. But I do try to balance my time and make sure that I'm providing flat level support and boardroom support and what I've kind of found to be the correct ratio for my current position and the current needs of our different business units and our leadership teams, and try to schedule that out as best as possible.
And I think that's a very good point, is that scheduling comment, because I've had some questions lately from people on time management and how do you manage that? Because clearly there are things that you want to accomplish or need to accomplish during the week. And as you called it, putting out the fires and in production, that's a large amount of what we might be doing. So how do you create time in your schedule to make sure you get the things done that you need to get done?
Yeah. So one thing that I try to stay with in terms of like being able to rapidly respond is stay caught up. So I do have a great family at home. I have an awesome wife and two young kiddos, and I do value that time, right? If it's the weekend or they're up, I try to respect that time as much as I can. But there are occasions once the kiddos are, asleep. Hopefully they go to bed at 8 p.m. most nights, where I do some work and get caught up, right? Or if they are taking a nap Saturday or Sunday afternoon, I use that hour to get caught up. And what I try to do is I try to stay on top of emails where I don't have 200, 300 unread messages in my inbox, because that can take you a full afternoon to get unburied from. And that does happen, right? When I'm out, on our West Coast trips or even our Eastern trips, right? Those are 2, 3 day trips. I'm trying to spend as much time with those people and at the slat level as possible to have the greatest influence that I can within that visit. Because I might not be there for another 3 or 4 months, right? So there are times where it's conferences or meetings or well-deserved day off or something like that where you do get buried and you have to unbury. But if you can keep yourself up to date on your communications, whether that's phone calls, texts, or emails, all of a sudden when someone calls you or texts you or you see an email with that big red exclamation point or flag, you're ready to respond to that and you're able to shift from the important to the urgent category. So I try to stay in that important category as much as possible. There are times where I do live in the urgent, right? And I shift from urgent to even more urgent, right? But if you're in the majority, say 80% of the time in that important category, then when there is that urgent inquiry, when there is a fire to put out, you can respond and then get back to kind of your regularly set schedule. The other thing too is just to be highly organized. I just make simple lists. It's not like I have everything in Excel or have, this full out organization chart of how I'm going to structure my day or what's the highest priority or what's not. But I just continually make lists. I have these yellow notes here, these piece of papers, and I might make a list 4 or 5 times a day and just stay current and update that. And then I just try to look at the clock and say, okay, it's 12:20 as we're recording this podcast, right? We're going to be tied up here for a bit. And I have a meeting at 2 and I have a call at 3. And I'd like to be home at 5 to spend some time with my kiddos. So I have 4 things that are on that list. So then how much time am I going to spend on each one of those 4 things? So there will be times where I might get 80 or 90% of that item done, right? And then I'll move on to the next, right? And then I'll say, okay, this is something that I can finish up tonight or tomorrow morning, but I need to at least spend 30 to 40 minutes here on it today because I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And I think that's where some people get stuck in terms of their time management or how much they can balance at a time is they will get to item 1 on their list and they'll get stuck and then they won't get to 2, 3, 4, 5, right? They're still working on 1. There are times where if you hit a hurdle or you're like, I need to think about this. I'm going to think about this tonight and come back to it tomorrow versus in, sitting there and pondering. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you only have so much time in the day. So there are times where I might not be able to cross anything off that list, but I work on each of those items to where they're more manageable and are easily accomplished and try to accomplish more versus than just, I'm only going to do 1 and then I want to go to 2 and then I'm going to go to 3, right? So those are just things that I found helpful. You also have to be very respectful of your time and your commitments. It's very easy for me to say yes to things, right? Both internally and externally. If there's someone, from our vet clinic that wants to learn more about swine nutrition and production, it's real easy for me to say yes. And what I found is you can say yes, but make sure it works within your schedule, right? So as I say, Mondays and Wednesdays are typically my meeting days. So if I can fit it in between one of my Monday meetings or my Wednesday meetings versus scheduling it like Tuesday at 2, when I probably need to be at the slat level, or at one of our farms or our feed mills. Well, if I have a meeting at 2, then it's really tough to get to a location and then back from a location, right? Kind of messes up that day. So just having a little bit of schedule integrity of knowing what you can take on and then when does it best fit within your schedule to take on as well. I think those things have been helpful. Not that I haven't mastered by any means, but I just think that those are some things that I've found that have worked. And I think it's also very important to then reflect on the back end. So I do put things in Excel about once a quarter. I try to best map out where am I spending my time, on which account am I spending my time, on which pigs am I spending my time, and in which people am I spending my time with. And then I try to go back through in terms of, our system priorities and the number of pigs that each one of those situations has. And how important is that within, quote unquote, my responsibilities as our managing partner, and see if that aligns. And if there's areas where 10% of my time is being spent on 50% of my pigs, but I have another situation where 40% of my time is being spent on 10% of my pigs, well, then I probably need to do some time allocation. And I probably need to have some critical conversations with the people involved in those situations, because they might be asking more of me than probably what should be. And then I need to have that conversation with them on saying, this is what's been asked of me before. I said yes because I was willing to do it. After reevaluating my time, this is something that I can no longer justify doing, and here's why. So here's what I'm going to suggest, right? Let's move this report or this data mining or this call to this individual. They're fully capable. They'll do an outstanding job, and I'll make sure that I supervise their work, or I'll hop on this call from time to time to make sure this is being done correctly. Right? So if you go through that kind of situation and then you provide a solution as well, I think that'll help manage your time as effectively as one can. How about that, Laura?
I think that's great. And I agree. I mean, the other thing I would always do is if I wanted some downtime or I needed downtime to think, I would my 1 hour trips to farms or whatever, that was my time. Or if it was those phone calls, right, I'd be making my list of who to call while I was driving, and to do that because, driving down a country road can get pretty boring some days. And so that was always useful too. But those are great, great tips on time management and the process and thoughts around how you manage your accounts. And it actually kind of led me to the next question is you have so many accounts. You have multiple farms and feed mills and so forth. So what do your daily observations of the farms look like?
Yeah, so daily observations of the farm. So I probably look at each farm at least once a week. So I'll try to segment this a bit. So on more, nurseries, I will look at wean weights, feed intake, and mortality, right? Because we don't have growth and feed conversion till, probably 2 weeks till that nursery's closed out, right? So I'll look at those three KPIs across, all the farms that we have, and have been fortunate to have some people develop some dashboards for me to where, that's about a 5 or 10 minute process is all. And I will look at that every Wednesday. So Wednesday is usually my wean to finish day. And then on the grow finish side, I'll look at the same things, but I will add in market weights and our cut strategies, right? So how many days is our first cut? What are our weights of our second, third, and fourth cuts? And then what do our barn dumps look like? And see if that's in line with what our projected feed program models have spit out and have determined for us, right? So that's kind of a validation for me every Wednesday morning. Sit down on that, and then we discuss that in our grow finish production meetings. So, hey, our projected average daily gain or our projected, weight at first cut or our projected market weight was X, and we're at Y. Why is that, right? So, is that because our health challenges were more impactful than what we thought? Is that because we had 10 more loads last week? Therefore, we're ahead of our marketing, flow, and therefore we may need to make some adjustments going forward. What does that look like, and get caught up there? On the south side, I'll look at things on Friday morning. We have a weekly report that, looks at our 10 to 15 KPIs that we've determined to be our most valuable. So, things like breed target, wean to estrus interval, fair wean rate, number born alive, pre-wean mortality, sow mortality as well. And then once a month, we'll look at our feed usage. So gestation feed usage per sow, lactation feed usage per sow, and then we'll also look at feed cost per farm, right? So how many pigs did they wean based off of those feed usages and those costs? And were they at our target? So every month we say, okay, here's your lactation costs, here's your gestation cost, here's how many pigs we expect to wean based off the health status or the genetics of the farm. Therefore, we expect that target cost per pig to be X. Was it close, right? And if it wasn't, then what on-site support do I need to provide, right? Are we overfeeding sows? Are we underfeeding sows? We think lactation intake should be 15, 16, pounds per sow. It's only 13. Why is that? Are we running out of feed? Are we not cleaning feeders? Do we not have ventilation correct? All those things that I can provide on-site support with. And sometimes that's an email or call, right? Sometimes that's not me, physically being on site. Sometimes that's an email or call. So those are just some things that I look at on a periodic basis. And then there's times where I get an inquiry and I get into our dashboards or our database and pull things as needed as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I think those are all really good activities for a week, and that certainly keeps you busy checking all of those farms. But you also mentioned not only looking at records every week, but you're going into what you call the slat level, which means you go to the barns. So what do you look at when you go into the barns? So you looked at the records probably ahead of time. And so, what are your checklist items that you have to do or want to do when you go to a barn?
Yeah, so I would say there's two big buckets that I try to look at going to a farm. So A is kind of my nutritionist hat, and then B is also just a different perspective hat and providing support to our production managers or our veterinarians and just looking at things that maybe they've been so focused on, maybe they haven't seen or may have been blinded to them. So from the nutritionist perspective, that hat first, you're exactly right. Feed usage is probably priority one on the slat level, right? So we have an expected average daily feed intake, whether that's a nursery pig or a gestating sow or a lactating sow, right? And are we hitting that target? Well, I got the piece of paper that says, yes, we are. No, we aren't, right? And then as you get onto the farm, you're trying to identify why are we hitting this target or why aren't we hitting this target? And it kind of starts from the feed bin management, and then you work all the way to the animal, right? So are feed bins being maintained and rotated properly if they're in tandem? Are they being cleaned out? Do the boots have cracks? Do they look leaky? Are the feed lines in great shape or are they held together by 20 years of duct tape? Like all those things, right? And then you kind of work towards the feeder, right? So if it's on the sow farm, our gestation box is weighed and set appropriately. If it's a lactation feeder, have those feeders been cleaned out? Some lactation feeders now have adjustments. Are those set correctly? We incorporate more technology into our sow farms all the time. So if you have an electronic sow feeding system, has that electronic sow feeding system been calibrated correctly, right? Or is it just saying, hey, we're giving the sow 5 pounds per day, but it's actually giving them 6 because it hasn't been calibrated in 6 or 7 months, right? So sometimes with technology, where we used to weigh feed boxes every quarter and knew exactly when to do it, sometimes we think the technology is so advanced that it'll do those simple steps for us, right? So just ensuring that that's done. On the wean to finish side or the gilt development side, we'll look at feeder adjustments, of course, but then feeder inventory as well, right? We have feeders that can hold 400, 500 pounds, but sometimes we have the tube clear down to the bottom. So why are we having out of feed events? Well, maybe only 50 or 100 pounds of that feeder storage is being used. So if we don't have our biggest, best intake pigs on that, feed system trigger, whether it's a halo system or whatever it is, some pens may be running out of feed just due to storage. Or, instead of running feed maybe once or twice a day, now we're running feed, 8 times a day and we're having some feed bridging, right? So just those things of just matching that up and looking at the feed system from basically the point of delivery to consumption, and then providing those simple observations and those simple action items can be extremely impactful. And I would say there's sometimes, and I get told this by my partners in production staff a lot, is I tend to underestimate that actually. I just, I'll say, hey, here's the issue, X is it, and then, put it in an email report and that's it. Say like, oh, that was no big deal. And yeah, there's 2 months later, we'll say, hey, that change was really impactful. And here's why. And go like, oh, I really didn't think anything or much about it, right? Just doing my job. So I think those things are big. Then from there, I do look at the pigs, right? So, wean to finish, making sure that, composition looks correct. I am a former livestock judge, so I don't think I ever lose that perspective a bit, right? So I do know in terms of what loin depth and back fat we should be at each stage of growth, and does that look appropriate or does it not based off of our lean accretion models and our fat deposition models, et cetera. Things like structural soundness, lameness, foot health, et cetera. And then same on the south side, right? Spend a lot of time walking through our gilts, looking at structural soundness, locomotion, lameness, anything like that to determine, do these girls need some more support? Are we selecting appropriately? Gilt size, weight, age is really important. So, our gilts that are breed eligible in our sow farms, are they the appropriate age? Are they appropriate weight? Have they been there way too long? Have they had an HNS, et cetera? That type of support. And then from there, as we go to our sows, our gestating sows in good condition, what's the variation around them? We do use the caliper and we mark all our sows and gilts. So it's real easy for me to walk rows and walk pins and actually have the data and the math to say, yep, we're 87% ideal, 3% thin, and then we're 10% heavy, right? So we're in a good spot in terms of where we need to be, or maybe we're not, right? And then in lactation, right? Are sows constipated before they farrow? What does fecal quality look like? What does mammary development look like? What does milk letdown look like? And then as they get ready to wean, how do they look? Are they in good shape? They've lost a lot of weight, everything in between. So just those pigs observations. And then I kind of move to that last bucket, which is just talking to people. Are they engaged? Are they excited about what they do? Do they care about they do? Are things well maintained? Are things clean? Biosecurity is always important regardless of the site. Are those protocols being followed? What are the potential gaps in biosecurity that I see, right? Things that, I'm not there to necessarily, talk about personnel issues or, meeting this job, et cetera. So I can really take a third party perspective on how well is this team functioning, or how well is this individual, performing, how engaged are they? Are they completely checked out, right? It can provide that feedback because I may be on that farm, today and won't get back there till August or September. So it's real easy just to provide that non-biased, fresh information on how both the pigs, the people, and the farm are looking. And sometimes I underestimate that as well, just that value and that perspective. So.
No, and I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that I always try to do too when I would make a site visit, I would at least let the production manager know and the veterinarian know. Sometimes they'd come with me, which is always a good conversation. But at least I would let them know. And so that if I did notice biosecurity issues or scours or something going on the management side, I could communicate that to them, and it wouldn't feel like I was maybe doing their job or trying to step on toes, but rather, as you mentioned, kind of being that third person, because it's really easy in all parts of our production business to get what we call barn blind, right? We just become so ingrained in this is what we're doing, and we kind of miss some pieces that sometimes complete the puzzle to a problem that we're trying to solve. So, I think those are all great observations and suggestions.
Yeah. Could I had just two quick follow-ups to that, Laura. I gave a 4-minute answer on everything that I look at. And I would say all on that follow-up is it's very easy to overwhelm whoever the manager or the individual is during that visit and after that visit. I leave very little with them, and I might leave them with just 2 very important action items. And then I might take that big, long laundry list that I said that I saw and then talk to the production manager, the veterinarian, about that, because the last thing that I want to do is uncoach something that they're working on or put something that's probably at priority 12. Now all of a sudden, number 1, because there was this new person here, that said I need to do X.
Yeah.
So the production manager or the veterinarian might have been working, for 4 months on trying to get this implemented. And all of a sudden, I just took it from priority 1 to priority 4, right? Because now they want to do this new shiny thing.
Mhm.
So that's one thing that I've just learned over time, as you have, Laura, is it's very easy to overwhelm people, right? I always say that I'm a friendly face. I'm here to say thank you first for
Mhm.
everything that you do and helping us, raise pork to feed the world. The second thing is I'm here to support you as best as I can. So the last thing that I want to do is not be supportive. I'm here to help. So if I leave a laundry list of 10 things, or if I undermine or, indirectly uncoach, something that our leadership team's been working on, then I've done the opposite thing of what the objective was to be there in the first place. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. And just wanted to follow up on that great point.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, and those are exactly what people need to think about is just don't overwhelm because you're right. Anytime any of us would get a list like that, it's daunting and it just is defeating almost, right? And so we're there to build because they are doing a lot and they're very busy and we want to encourage rather than take down. So very
Yeah,
good.
yeah, sometimes you just have to put yourself in the other perspective, right? So the first, I don't know, it's probably way too long of an answer. 10 minutes was all about time management and how I do this and all I have to do. So if I had someone that observed me for 3 hours and then gave me 11 additional things to do before I leave at 5 p.m., I don't know if I would have the most positive reaction to that, right?
I
So
certainly wouldn't.
yes. So why would we expect the same thing if we go on farm or to one of our feed mills?
Mhm.
Right? We should leave them with the most valuable things that they can execute. And then those additional things, we can work on that. And we can put people in place to help them work on that and support them on that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think those are all really, really great suggestions. I'm going to ask one quick question before our time wraps up. And it really kind of comes back to one that I hear a lot or I get asked a lot is how often are you checking things like the price of ingredients, the diets that you're using, and even you mentioned the marketing strategies. So that's something a lot of production nutritionists get asked to do is to tell people when the optimal weight is or what the optimal weight is for market. So how often are you doing all of those things?
Yeah. So try to break those down because there's different answers for different things that I look at. So we'll start first with pricing. So most of our mills will send in pricing once a week. So yeah, we have one of our individuals at our feed desk, Mike, that will summarize all our ingredient information and our pricing every Friday morning. So I'll then look at that and then summarize it and take note of major changes. And it's not necessarily price increases, but it's price increases among the ingredients, right? So what's the corn to soy ratio? What's the corn to distillers ratio? What's the corn to fat ratio, right? And if those have changed, then I'll make note of that. And the reason for that is we try to update our grow finish diets, at least in terms that have larger volumes, every 2 weeks. So we'll update those diets for pricing and then update them for ingredient information. Now, that doesn't mean that we're making a spec change. And by a spec change, I mean we're changing like tryptophan to lysine ratio or energy, concentration of those diets. It's just an update to try to hit that projected performance in those specs as economically as possible compared to 2 weeks ago when pricing might have been different, or maybe the nutrient profile of our ingredients have changed a bit as well, right? On our south side, I'll try to look at those once a month. Once again, may not change those once a month, but we'll at least look at them once a month. And then same with our nursery diets. I'll look at those once a month. May not change them, but we'll at least look at them. So pricing can be volatile. And I think one thing that's important to think about if you are going to update your diets based off of pricing is you kind of have to take out your crystal ball and say, what will these diets look like over the 2 weeks or the month or the quarter, right? That these diets are going to be implemented. So we can forecast a little bit on nutrient shifts, right? Hey, the lysine and our protein levels are, coming down in our distiller sources over time. Okay, we can forecast that out a little bit via regression. But pricing is way more difficult than that. So if you're going to include more distillers as a cost savings approach, what does that distillers to corn ratio look like throughout the 2 weeks or the month that you're going to employ this diet? Is it going to be the same? Is it going to be greater? Is it going to be less? And sometimes you might err a little bit if you think it's going to be greater or less, right? And then I just try to keep notes within my Outlook calendar if we make decisions like that to say, hey, I need to check this in a week, or I need to check this in 2 weeks, because I didn't just least cost formulate it as is, right? I took kind of that art form, right, of formulation and said, hey, I think in 2 weeks, the ratio might be this between corn and distillers, so I would include X. Let's make sure that that's right, because I don't want to stay on this, this exact formula if that indeed has not come true, right? So there's some things like that I use. I'd also be remiss if said that if I did it by myself. I have Kristen Olson right here in the office next to me that helps a lot. She's our associate swine nutritionist, and helps, in terms of our ingredient procurement, and our quality assurance. So in terms of like what she's booking ingredients for and how that factors into our feed program, both in terms of price and usages, it's beyond a support. In fact, makes my job really easy. And then also we leverage the Cargill Animal Nutrition team. So my colleagues that I went to grad school with, which was really fun, Chad Pilcher and Keenan Lee, and then Aaron Holmes, and then Lee Ruckman, Stacy and Brendan as well. Our formulators do a great job as well. So just want to give a shout out there. Don't want to take all the credit because they do a lot of the late work and make my life way easier and help us execute every day as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's certainly a lot to do for sure. Mm-hmm. Well, Trey, our time is wrapping up. And so maybe what I'll have you do is kind of summarize a couple of key things that you would like people to know about what you do and how to work with you.
Sure. Yeah. So I think one key thing that nutritionists can bring to a production team, whether that's an internal team or a consulting nutritionist, is, as we all know, feed cost is the largest part of the cost from farrow to finish or wean to finish. So if that nutritionist can accurately predict the performance, then they can accurately predict that cost, and therefore can best help you manage your checkbook and what your balance sheet looks like. So if your labor is consistent, if your space costs are consistent, if your supplies are consistent, usually the most variable thing is feed. So if you can have a reasonable guess on what your feed cost will be, then it's a lot easier to make business decisions, acquisition decisions, hedging decisions, etc. So I would first encourage anyone that's working in a nutritionist or has a nutritionist on staff or has a nutritionist available to ask them for that type of support. I think that's really important. I think nutritionists are this is a biased answer, but I think we're pretty good at math and using regression to our advantage and forecasting and modeling out. And I think that should be used to the greatest extent possible to help us make informed decisions. So whether that's adding 2 more barns because it's cheaper than adding, 10 or 20 pounds of fat to still maintain market weight, or whether it's we should convert, to a batch fed system or stay continuous, or if we should add a sow farm, or we should do a remodel, or if we should change our marketing strategy, whatever that may be, a nutritionist is really important to have in that room and be part of that problem-solving equation. I joked around with Wayne Cast about this about 5 years ago, and it kind of came out that math is the only true science. And Wayne really liked that. He's like, that might be one of the smartest things I've ever heard. But I always feel like if I can get a problem into a math equation, I have a great chance of solving it, or at least being able to provide solutions to at least consider on implementing, right? So I would just encourage anyone that's working with nutritionists to just keep that in mind and use that to the greatest extent. Second thing as well is nutritionists tend to look at things at a population basis, right? We tend to look at things as the system or the scale or the flow or the feed mill, right? So there are times when things are presented to us on the pig level, right? We have 10 pigs that or dying of strep. We had, 8 prolapses. And I would say first and foremost that I'll talk to the nutritionist that A, you need to listen, and B, you need to be empathetic. Because C, there might be something that you can do about it, right? But D, I think that we need to do a good job of explaining, yes, that is an issue, and yes, that is a financial consequence. But here's the larger math of why we're doing what we're doing. Or here's the larger math of why we need to keep the status quo. And then for the non-nutritionist side, if that's communicated correctly, need to understand that, once again, our primary job is to manage the checkbook, right? As I like to say, like I'm here to manage your checkbook as if it was my own. So if we are making those population decisions, yes, our feed conversion is not a 2-4-5 because we're feeding a more economical diet that has the best, pound per carcass gain, or, however you want to look at that, pound per gain or whatever it may be. And here's why your checkbook looks like X versus Y than what you're suggesting, right? And just understand that we are managing and looking at that as best as we can. So sometimes I think, people might view nutritionists as cold or, mean-spirited or not empathetic. It's just not how we're trained, and usually it's not how most of us are wired, right? So we try to look at things in terms of mass scale as well. So I would just kind of throw out, sometimes that's not, stated that black and white, but I just always think that's helpful to explain of here's why we're proposing solutions that we are, and here's why we're throwing out, these type of numbers or coming at it from this way. It's that's our job.
No, I think those are great. And I totally agree. And we always talk mainly on, yes, this is what production could look like, but here's what the dollar looks like at the end. And we're going to make the decision to go with the dollar as long as it doesn't impair welfare. And so that's exactly a great point for people to know about nutritionists.
Yeah. And I think just as long as, you listen and you're open to collaboration, you're going to be successful. I think sometimes it's easy to be defensive, and where you're defensive, you stop listening. It's like you'd have music ringing in your ears, right? So
it's time for our famous 3. Want to save up to 25% in labor time when cleaning your barns? With MS Top Foam Power, you effectively remove all historical pollution. MS Top Foam Power ensures the surface is perfectly clean and ready for disinfection. Find your dealer at www.msgold.eu. We have a time and labor-saving product for you. AgriSlats by Healthy Farms is your solution. No more lugging jugs around the barn every month. With AgriSlats, you simply drop the slat through the floor twice a year, and it works to break down solids, reduces crusting and forming. To learn more, visit myhealthyfarms.com.
As you know, we like to ask our guests a couple of different questions, and I know we've done these before, but I'll ask again. The first question is what's your favorite swine resource?
Yeah, so still my favorite swine resource that I use all the time is still Feed Efficiency in Swine by John Patience. It's getting dated. It's 11 years now since it's published. But it's still, some of the chapters are just very well written, and I just appreciate how they take very, very basic science and apply it to a system perspective. And there are times I've probably read that book, I don't know, 11, 12 times. And there's chapters I've probably read 20 times since it's been published. But it's just a good reminder sometimes if you're in that urgent mode, or you're like, man, I want to take a step back and reassess, am I looking at the right things? Am I keeping, the correct perspective in terms of thinking about, whole sow farm feed conversion and whole system feed conversion, and just how should we measure that and how should we look at that? And I just think it provides a really good resource if you're a brand new grad student that's interested in swine nutrition and you're trying to figure out, is industry nutrition or academia nutrition, where do I want to be and where do I fit? it provides you a great perspective on, hey, this is what I find interesting. I'm going to learn more about this, to even a seasoned nutritionist that's done this for a while now, just to kind of refocus on, hey, here's the important things, and here's how we should measure it, and here's how we should go about it.
Absolutely. That's a very good book. I also recommend that one as well. How about something that's not related to pigs? You're very clearly busy, but do you have time to read outside of work?
Yeah, I do. I read to my 4-year-old son and my 1-year-old daughter. She turns 1 tomorrow, actually, every evening. So the book that I'm going to suggest is actually the Butter Battle book by Dr. Seuss. It was one of his last books that he published, so a little bit different here because this is what I get to do every evening. But I think it's really good in terms of what we think about in terms on the people side. So for those that don't know it, I'm sure everyone's aware of this book. It's a classic, but basically there's two people, right? There's the Yuks and the Zucks, and one side butters their bread butter side up, and the other does it butter side down. And it was basically based off the U.S. and the Soviet Union towards the end of the Cold War, right? And these two people basically have an arms race. They start with a little wall and then a bigger wall. And then, they have different machines to kind of keep the Yuks away from the Zooks and the Zooks away from the Yuks. And all of a sudden it gets to the end where they have this weapon that may destroy the world. And throughout the entire book, as you're reading it, there's this little kid where his grandpa is one of these patrol agents. And at the time, this kid's thinking, well, all we need to do is just ask, why do they butter their butter side down, and listen and gain that perspective. And all this conflict goes away. So I think there's times as our systems get bigger, as we work with different partnerships, both internally and externally, as we have people that we love working with and people that we'd rather not work with, that it's very important to just ask questions and get to know them and understand what drives them and what motivates them and what encourages them. And just something as asking a question of, hey, how's your day going? How are you doing? Can open up that door to where those relationships can be built, and you can not only decrease the conflict that may be there, but then mitigate it in future instances. So I just think it's just a great reminder that instead of building walls, sometimes it's just one little question of, hey, how can I help? Or just one little hey, good job. Those little things go a long way, where at any point in time in that book, whether it was page 2 or page 60, that could have been asked and it wasn't. And you're kind of left with a very sour note at the end. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's that simple. So
Yeah, that's actually a great insight to a children's book. I think those little messages are really important, and so for the audience, that might be a fun little book to pick up and read some night. My last question for you, Trey, focuses on if you could think of someone in your life that you define as successful, what's a trait that they possess that's allowed them to be successful?
I think the most important thing that I found that separates people that I quote unquote deem successful, or that I seek out at events or networking opportunities, are people that don't just do a great job of identifying problems, but people that do a great job of identifying problems and then solving those problems. You don't have to have a PhD to solve problems. You don't have to necessarily work 24/7, 365 to solve problems, right? But people that have that ability to provide solutions, act upon them, and then validate those solutions with, data-driven results, tend to be really successful. And just going through about okay, how do you identify the problem? There's 20 different ways that you could solve this problem. Why'd you pick this one? What did you learn after solving that problem? And then how do you make the next problem that you ran across with even a better solution? I just think that always fascinates me when you see me in a group of people at a conference, or if I'm on a phone call. Those are kind of things that I'm seeking out, sometimes indirectly and sometimes really directly. Like, hey, what problem have you been working on? What did you try to go about to solve it? And then how do you validate that? And then how did you prove that your solution worked or didn't work? And then what did you learn from it? So I would say, people that I, have on my mentor list, or people that I look up to, both that I have a great relationship with and I just know of the people, right? It's that key trait that I find really important, and something that I try to work on and provide within my own system and teams and people I work with, and at home too. It's just that ability to problem solve and figure it out, and then make sure that it's validated as well. So
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great trait to have. Well, Trey, I want to thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure visiting with you as always, and certainly giving the audience a little bit of an insight as to what a production nutritionist does on a day-to-day basis. For our listeners, again, this is Dr. Trey Kellner, who is a nutritionist and manager or partner in AMBC. Thank you so much, Trey, for your time today.
thanks, Laura. Appreciate it.